My entire life was dismantled by a single tear-streaked confession. The words hung in the air of our bedroom, a space that just moments before felt like a sanctuary, now transformed into a chamber of horrors. I, David, 29 years old, stood frozen, my own tears of guilt and inadequacy drying on my cheeks, replaced by a cold, creeping numbness. I had always prided myself on being a grounded, perceptive man. I built my career in software engineering methodically, one line of code at a time. I saved for a down payment on our suburban house for 5 years. I planned my proposal to Lena for 6 months, wanting every detail to be perfect. She, at 27, was my beautiful, chaotic counterbalance, a freelance graphic designer who lived for impulse, for the thrill of a last-minute road trip, for painting our living room wall burgundy because she'd seen the color in a dream. We'd been married for 2 years, and in all that time, I thought our differences were the glue that held us together. Our daughter, Maya, was 4 months old, a tiny, perfect human with Lena's dark curls and a pair of eyes that seemed to look right through me, as if sensing the void I felt inside. The disconnect started subtly. In the first weeks, I chalked it up to exhaustion, the universal language of new parenthood. But as the fog of sleepless nights began to lift for Lena, it only thickened for me. I'd hold Maya, feed her, rock her back to sleep, and feel nothing. It was like caring for a very delicate, very needy piece of furniture. The overwhelming, ferocious love every other new father described was absent. I'd watch videos of men sobbing with joy at their child's birth and feel like a fraud. The guilt became a constant companion, a heavy stone in my gut. That Tuesday night, it finally crushed me. I just put Maya down after a 2 a.m. feeding. She'd been fussy, her small face scrunched in displeasure, and as I paced the floor with her, I felt only a remote, clinical desire for her to be quiet. When she finally settled, I crawled back into bed beside Lena and the dam broke. I confessed it all, the hollowness, the performance, the terrifying fear that I was broken, incapable of the most fundamental human emotion. I feel like a monster. I sobbed, my voice crackled with shame so profound it was physical. She's my daughter, and I feel nothing. Lena's reaction was not what I had braced for. I expected her to hold me, to tell me it was normal, to share her own doubts. Instead, there was a stillness, then a sharp, involuntary gasp. When I looked up, her face was ashen. Then the sobs came, not quiet, sympathetic tears, but great, heaving wails that seemed to tear themselves from her chest. She was clutching the duvet, her knuckles white, her body shaking uncontrollably. My confusion momentarily overrode my own distress. "Lena, what's wrong? It's my fault, not yours," I pleaded, reaching for her, but she flinched away as if my touch burned. And then the world I knew ceased to exist. The truth didn't trickle out. It erupted, a geyser of betrayal that flooded the room. Between ragged, hysterical breaths, she told me. It wasn't my fault I felt disconnected. Maya wasn't mine. She had known. She'd had a private paternity test done when Maya was just a few weeks old, a secret fear gnawing at her after a drunken night she tried to forget. The results were hidden in the back of her old college portfolio, tucked between charcoal sketches. The father was my cousin, Alex. The affair, she stammered, was a stupid, meaningless fling that started about a month after our wedding. She claimed I was always at the office, buried in a major project launch, and she felt lonely and neglected. Alex, charming and always available, was there. It lasted only a few weeks, a handful of secret meetings, and she ended it, consumed by guilt. But then the pregnancy test came back positive. She saw the paternity results and made a choice. She decided to bury the truth, to build our life on this catastrophic lie, because she loved me and was terrified of losing the stable, secure future we had. The air turned to lead in my lungs. The framed photo of us on our wedding day on the dresser seemed to mock me. The sound of my own heartbeat was a deafening drum solo in my ears. I didn't yell. I didn't cry anymore. A surreal, almost peaceful calm descended, wrapping around me like a shield. I stood up, my movements slow and deliberate, as if I were moving underwater. I walked to my closet, pulled out my old gym duffel bag, and began to pack. I selected jeans, t-shirts, socks, underwear, my actions robotic precise. Lena was on her knees now, clinging to my leg. Her words a slurry of, "I'm so sorry, David. We can fix this. I love you. It was a mistake." I looked down at her, at the woman I had loved since I was 23, and I felt nothing. It was like looking at a stranger. I gently, firmly, pried her hand from my leg. I finished packing, zipped the bag, and walked out of the bedroom, down the hall, past the nursery door. I didn't look inside. I walked out a house we had painted together, the house with the burgundy wall, and into the cold, silent embrace of the night. I got into my car, drove to the first hotel I found with vacancy sign, paid in cash, and locked the door behind me. The first thing I did, sitting on the edge of the impersonal hotel bed, was block her number on my phone. Then I sat in the silence until the sun came up. The next few days were a desolate landscape of grief and disorienting rage. I didn't call anyone. The shame was a cage. How do you form the sentence? My wife had a baby with my cousin. The words themselves felt like a betrayal of the natural order. But Lena, in her panic and desperation, did the talking for me. She called my parents. My phone rang 2 days into my exile in a generic hotel room. It was my mother's number. A part of me, the wounded little boy, yearned for her comfort, for her outrage on my behalf, for the unconditional support I'd always known. The conversation that followed was perhaps the second greatest betrayal of my life. "David, we know," my mother said, her voice strained, not with sorrow for me, but with a palpable, frantic anxiety. "Listen, son, what Lena did was unforgivable. A terrible, terrible mistake. But you have to think about the bigger picture now. You have to be the bigger man here. Forgive her. For your family. For Maya." I actually laughed, a harsh, brittle sound that startled even me. "What family, Mom?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "The one where my wife cheated on me with your nephew and passed off his child as your grandchild? That family." There was a shuffling sound, and my father came on the line. His tone was the one he used when discussing quarterly losses or a failed contract bid, grave, businesslike, devoid of paternal warmth. "David, let's be pragmatic. This isn't just about your hurt feelings. Lena's father, Robert, is in the final stages of a major investment in my company. You know how things have been these last 2 years. This isn't just a lifeline. It's a complete revival. It's the difference between keeping the doors open and your mother and I retiring with nothing. If you divorce Lena, that deal evaporates. Our relationship with them will be ruined. Robert will never sign. I will lose everything I've worked for 35 years. Everything." The disgust that washed over me was so complete, so visceral. I thought I might be sick. My father's life's work, a struggling construction firm he'd inherited from his own father, was being weighed against my entire emotional world, my shattered sense of self, my future. They were coolly, rationally asking me to live a lie, to raise another man's child, my own cousin's child, to share a bed in the life of the woman who had looked me in the eye every day for years and perpetuated the most profound deception imaginable, all for a business deal. All so they could maintain their social standing and financial security. "I am not your sacrificial lamb," I said, my voice low and steady, though my hand gripping the phone was trembling. "You have made your priorities painfully clear. Lose my number." I ended the call, and with a few deliberate taps, blocked both of their numbers. Their betrayal was a catalyst. The raw, paralyzing grief was still there, a black hole in my chest, but it was now orbited by a cold, clear, and focused fury. I spent the next day in that hotel room, my laptop burning a patch on my thighs, researching and calling every top-rated divorce lawyer in the city. I retained a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Angela Graves. I filed the papers. And then I decided that if my parents were so concerned with their reputation, with the facade of a happy, unified family, I would give everyone a front-row seat to the rotten foundation it was built upon. I became a man possessed. I spent an entire evening, fueled by cold rage and countless cups of bad hotel coffee, compiling a massive email list. I combed through old holiday card lists, my father's business website, my own social media contacts. I added every email address I could find from my parents' friends, my aunts, uncles, and cousins, my father's business partners and associates, even the foreman and a few long-time employees at his company. I wrote a concise, unemotional, and brutally factual email. I detailed Lena's affair with Alex, the concealed paternity test, the fraud I had been living, and the subsequent, shocking plea from my own parents to ignore it all to secure Robert's investment. I did not use inflammatory language. I let the facts speak for themselves. I ended the email by stating that, for my own mental and emotional survival, I was immediately pursuing a divorce and disassociating myself from my parents. I took a deep breath, my finger hovering over the trackpad for a moment, and then I clicked send. A grim, desolate sense of satisfaction settled over me. The bridges were burned. There was no going back. The fallout was immediate and volcanic. My phone, which I had temporarily unblocked to manage the email logistics, exploded into a cacophony of rings and notifications. My parents, using a revolving door of new numbers, called and texted, their messages a rapid evolution from furious, sputtering demands for an apology. How could you air our private family business? To desperate, pleading voicemails. The investment was gone. Robert had pulled out immediately. Their reputation was in tatters. Old friends were calling them. Expressions of sympathy laced with horrified judgment. They tried a new, manipulative tack. Lena, they claimed, had been officially diagnosed with severe postpartum depression, and my public humiliation was pushing her to the brink of a breakdown. I read the messages, I listened to the voicemails, and I felt nothing. They had constructed their entire world on a platform of appearances and financial gain, and I had simply kicked out the last remaining support beam. In the days and weeks that followed, I focused all my energy on the legal process. My lawyer, Angela, was a rock. She was confident we could successfully disestablish paternity, given Maya's very young age and the existence of a confirmed, alternative biological father. The relief this news brought was the first positive emotion I'd felt in weeks, but it was quickly followed by a deep, profound loneliness. I moved out of the hotel and into a sterile, furnished apartment near my office. It had no personality, no burgundy walls, no traces of shared life. It was perfect. Work became my only refuge, my sole identity. I buried myself in code, in projects, in the clean, logical world of ones and zeros where there was no betrayal, only syntax errors. About a week after my nuclear email, the official response came from Lena's lawyer. She was not contesting the divorce itself. The evidence was too overwhelming, but she was mounting a fierce challenge to the paternity disestablishment. Her lawyer argued that as the legal father listed on the birth certificate, and having been present and acting as Maya's father for the first 4 months of her life, I had established a parental relationship, and thus had both a financial and emotional responsibility. Angela called it a Hail Mary attempt to secure child support from someone, anyone. Since Alex was proving elusive, we immediately filed a counterpetition to disestablish paternity. formally naming Alex as the biological father and submitting our request for a court-ordered DNA test. The silence from my parents was broken a few days later. My mother, from yet another new number, sent a long, rambling, and heartbreaking text. It was no longer just about the money. She described a life of social exile. They were pariahs. No one would return their calls. My father, she said, was a hollowed-out shell, spending his days sitting in his silent, empty office, talking about selling the business for whatever he'd get. She begged me to reconsider, to at least meet with them, to talk. I read the message 3 times, searching for some shred of remorse for what they had asked me to sacrifice for the pain I was in. I found none. There was only regret for their own lost status. I didn't respond. The damage was done, and it was a destruction of their own engineering. The court process, thankfully, was swift. The court-ordered DNA test proved conclusively, irrefutably, that I was not the father. The judge, a stern woman with no patience for games, ruled that given Maya's infancy, severing the legal tie with me was in the child's best interest, as it cleared the path for her to potentially form a relationship with her actual biological father, without legal confusion. My name was officially removed from the birth certificate. The moment Angela called me with the news, the relief was so profound it felt like a physical unburdening, as if 100-pound weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I was free, legally completely free. A month after the ruling, I heard through a well-meaning but gossipy cousin that my parents had indeed sold the business. It wasn't even a sale, really. It was a fire sale, assets picked over for pennies on the dollar. They were leaving the city, packing up a lifetime of memories into a moving truck, and heading to a small, quiet town in Colorado where my mother's sister lived. It was a sad, quiet end to my father's legacy. The company his father had started with a single hammer and a truck. I felt a complex, aching pang of sorrow, not for the consequences they faced, but for the loss of what a family should be, for the proud man my father once was, for the relationships that were now irretrievably broken. The divorce itself was finalized 3 months later. It was a quiet, administrative affair, a simple signature on a form that officially ended the loud, catastrophic implosion of my marriage. There were no assets to fight over. I let her have the house and its contents. I wanted no reminders. Through the faint whispers of the grapevine, I heard that Lena had moved back in with her parents. Alex, true to his charming but profoundly selfish and commitment-phobic nature, had refused any involvement beyond the court-ordered child support he was now legally obligated to pay. He had apparently told Lena in no uncertain terms that he never wanted children and that she should have handled the situation when she'd had the chance. A small, dark part of me felt a flicker of satisfaction at that. They were both trapped in a mess of their own making. I made a conscious decision to rebuild. I found a therapist and committed to the slow, difficult work of untangling the knots of betrayal and grief. I joined a gym, channeling residual anger into physical exertion, watching my body grow stronger as my mind began to heal. I slowly, tentatively, reconnected with a few old, true friends who had reached out after my infamous email, not with gossip, but with genuine concern. The pain didn't vanish overnight. It would sneak up on me at odd moments. In the grocery store when I passed the baby aisle, in the scent of a perfume similar to Lena's on a stranger, in the quiet of my apartment on a Sunday morning. But it lost its sharp, debilitating edge. It became a manageable ache, a scar tissue over a deep wound, a permanent reminder of a lesson learned at the highest possible cost. About 8 months after the divorce was final, I was sitting in a sun-drenched coffee shop near my new apartment, a place I had chosen for myself and had grown to genuinely like. It wasn't just a temporary shelter. It was part of my new life. I was reading a novel, actually lost in the story, feeling a sense of peace that was no longer fragile, but steadily growing. I looked up from my page and saw a woman across the shop, struggling to maneuver a stroller through the door while precariously balancing 2 coffee cups. I got up without a second thought and held the door open for her. She smiled up at me, a warm, grateful, slightly flustered smile, and our eyes met for a second that stretched just a beat too long. It was a simple moment, a tiny, insignificant connection between 2 people. But for the first time, it didn't send me into a spiral of anxiety or mistrust. It just was. I went back to my table, a small, genuine, unforced smile touching my lips. The past was a country I had left behind. It had shaped me, scarred me, but it no longer defined me. They had taken my trust, my family, and the life I thought I was building. But they hadn't managed to take my future. I was finally, truly, ready to write a new story, one with protagonists who had survived the fire, one that was entirely and only mine,